Sara stared at her guitar in the corner of her bedroom, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. She'd been dreaming about starting a band with her friends for months, but every time she imagined walking up to them and suggesting it, her stomach twisted into knots. What if they laughed? What if they thought she wasn't good enough? What if they said no? But what Sara didn't know was that somewhere in rock history, a young man named Freddie Mercury had faced the exact same fears, and what he did next would change music forever. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in 2023, and Sara Martinez was sitting in her school's music room during lunch break. The 16-year-old had been playing guitar for 3 years, and lately she'd been writing her own songs. They weren't perfect, but they came from her heart, and when she played them alone in her room, she felt alive in a way nothing else could match. The problem was, they were meant to be heard by more than just her bedroom wall. Sara had noticed 3 other students who, like her, spent their lunch breaks in the music room. There was Alex, who could make the drums sing with a passion that gave Sara goosebumps. Maya, whose fingers danced across the bass guitar like she was born to play it. And David, whose voice had this raw, powerful quality that reminded Sara of the classic rock singers her dad loved. Together they could create something magical. Sara was sure of it, but approaching them, that was a different story entirely. What Sara didn't realize was that her hesitation echoed a moment in 1970, when a young Freddie Mercury stood outside the Trident Studios in London, clutching a notebook full of song ideas, terrified to approach 2 musicians named Brian May and Roger Taylor. His real name was Farrokh Bulsara then, and he was just another dreamer with big ideas and bigger fears. The difference was, Freddie decided to knock on that door, and Sara, she was about to learn why that decision changed everything. But before we dive into what Freddie did that day, and how it would inspire Sara to overcome her own fears, we need to understand something crucial about the power of collaboration. Because what happened next in Sara's story wasn't just about forming a band, it was about discovering that sometimes, our biggest dreams require the courage to reach out to others, even when every fiber of our being wants to hide. Sara watched Alex from across the room as he practiced a complex rhythm on the practice kit. His eyes were closed, completely lost in the music. And Sara could see why. The beat he was creating was incredible, sophisticated, with subtle variations that showed real skill. She'd been listening to him play for weeks, and each time she imagined how her songs would sound with his drumming behind them. But imagination was safe. Reality was terrifying. The thing about Freddie Mercury that most people don't know is that he wasn't always the confident frontman we remember from Queen's legendary performances. In fact, when he first met Brian May and Roger Taylor, he was working as a baggage handler at Heathrow Airport, selling artwork at local markets and dreaming of musical stardom. He had written songs, yes, but he had never been in a successful band. He had vision, passion, and undeniable talent, but he also had something else that would prove crucial: the courage to take that first terrifying step. Sara's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Emma. "You've been talking about starting a band for months. Just do it already." Easy for Emma to say. She wasn't the one who had to walk across the room and potentially face rejection. But as Sara looked at her phone, she remembered something her music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had told her class about Queen's formation. It was a story that had stuck with her, though she'd never thought it might hold the key to her own dreams. Mrs. Rodriguez had explained that Queen didn't start as Queen. They began as a band called Smile, which consisted of Brian May on guitar and Roger Taylor on drums. They were talented musicians, but they were missing something essential: a frontman who could take their music to the next level. Enter Freddie Mercury, who at the time was just a fan of their music, watching them perform at small venues around London. Here's where Sara's story takes an interesting turn, because what Freddie did next was exactly what Sara needed to do, but was too afraid to attempt. Freddie didn't just admire Smile from a distance. He didn't just wish he could be part of what they were creating. He made a decision that would terrify most people. He approached them, but it wasn't a casual conversation. Freddie had prepared. He had ideas. He had songs. And most importantly, he had a vision for what they could become together. The parallels between Freddie's situation and Sara's were striking, though Sara didn't realize it yet. Both were young artists with big dreams and limited experience in band dynamics. Both could see the potential in other musicians around them. And both were facing the same fundamental challenge: how do you convince talented people to take a chance on your vision? But here's what Sara was about to discover about Freddie's approach, and why it worked when so many other attempts at forming bands fail. Freddie didn't just walk up to Brian and Roger and say, "Hey, want to start a band?" He did something much smarter, much more compelling, and much more likely to succeed. He showed them what was possible. Sara took a deep breath and closed her guitar case. She'd made a decision. Tomorrow, she was going to approach Alex, Maya, and David. But tonight, she was going to prepare. She was going to do what Freddie Mercury had done all those years ago, because sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when they led to the creation of one of the greatest rock bands in history. What Sara didn't know yet was that her preparation would need to include more than just practicing her songs or rehearsing what she wanted to say. She was going to need to understand something fundamental about human psychology, about what motivates people to say yes to big, scary, exciting opportunities. And Freddie Mercury, despite his youth and inexperience, had understood this instinctively. The next morning, Sara arrived at school with her guitar and a notebook full of song ideas. She'd spent the previous evening researching Queen's formation story in detail, and what she'd discovered had both inspired and intimidated her. Freddie hadn't just approached Brian and Roger with vague enthusiasm, he'd approached them with a complete vision for what they could become, backed up by concrete evidence of his ability to contribute to that vision. But here's the part of the story that Sara found most encouraging. Freddie's first interaction with the members of Smile hadn't gone perfectly. In fact, it had been somewhat awkward, with Freddie's unusual appearance and theatrical personality initially putting them off. The difference was that Freddie hadn't let that initial awkwardness stop him. He'd persisted, not by being pushy, but by consistently demonstrating his value to their musical partnership. Sara found Alex in the music room during first period, working on a drum pattern that sounded like it could fit perfectly with one of her songs. Her heart was racing, but she remembered something she'd read about Freddie the night before. When he first approached Brian May, he hadn't started by talking about himself or his dreams. He'd started by talking about their music, showing that he understood and appreciated what they were already creating. "That rhythm is incredible," Sara said, walking over to where Alex was practicing. "It reminds me of something Roger Taylor might have played in Queen's early days." Alex looked up, surprised but pleased by the compliment. "Thanks, I've been working on incorporating some of those classic rock techniques into my playing. Roger Taylor is definitely an influence." Sara felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the opening she'd hoped for. "I've been studying Queen's formation story lately, and it's fascinating how they came together. Did you know that Freddie Mercury basically convinced Brian May and Roger Taylor to restart their band with a completely new vision?" "Really?" Alex seemed genuinely interested. "I knew Queen was formed from an earlier band, but I didn't know the details." This was Sara's moment. She'd learned from Freddie's approach that the key to inspiring collaboration wasn't to talk about what you wanted, but to help others see what was possible for all of you together. The crazy thing is, Freddie wasn't even an established musician when he approached them. He was just someone with big ideas and the courage to share them. He basically said, "I can see what you could become, and I want to help you get there." Alex set down his drumsticks, fully engaged now. "That's pretty bold. I respect that kind of confidence." "The thing is," Sara continued, her nervousness beginning to transform into excitement, "I keep watching you play and Maya on bass and David singing, and I think about what you could create together. It reminds me of how Freddie must have felt watching Smile perform, seeing all this untapped potential." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting we start a band?" Sara's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment of truth. She thought about Freddie standing outside those studio doors, deciding whether to knock. "Actually, yes, I am. I've written some songs that I think could be amazing with the right musicians, and when I imagine them arranged for a full band, I hear your drumming, Maya's bass lines, and David's voice." What happened next surprised Sara. Instead of the rejection or awkward laughter she'd been expecting, Alex smiled. "You know what? I've been thinking the same thing. We're all here every day. All obviously passionate about music, but we're all working separately. It seems like we're missing an opportunity." Sara felt a rush of relief and excitement that she imagined must have been similar to what Freddie felt when Brian and Roger first showed interest in his ideas. But she also knew, from her research, that this was just the beginning. Getting initial interest was one thing. Turning that interest into a functioning creative partnership was something else entirely. "So what's the next step?" Alex asked. Sara had prepared for this question too. Well, when Freddie joined Smile, he didn't just bring song ideas, he brought a complete vision for what they could become. He even suggested changing the band's name to Queen because he thought it sounded more regal and ambitious. Queen is a pretty iconic name, Alex agreed. So you're saying we need more than just the desire to play together? We need a shared vision for what we want to create. Exactly. Sara pulled out her notebook. I've been thinking about this a lot. What if we approached Maya and David together? Show them that we're serious about this, that we've already started building something. Alex nodded enthusiastically. I like that approach. It's less pressure on them, and it shows we're committed to making this work as a team rather than just hoping they'll join our individual projects. Sara realized that her fear of approaching her potential bandmates individually had actually led her to a better strategy. By building consensus gradually, starting with one person and then approaching others together, she was creating momentum and reducing the pressure on everyone involved. It was a more sophisticated approach than she'd initially planned, and she suspected it was closer to how Freddie had actually built Queen's partnership. They found Maya in the hallway between classes, her bass guitar case slung over her shoulder as always. Sara had noticed that Maya, like herself, seemed to be someone who preferred observing to being the center of attention. But when she played bass, she transformed into something powerful and confident. Maya, Alex called out. Do you have a minute? Sara and I want to run an idea by you. Maya looked curious, but slightly wary. What kind of idea? Sara decided to use the same approach that had worked with Alex. We've been talking about Queen's formation story, and how Freddie Mercury convinced Brian May and Roger Taylor to essentially restart their band with a bigger vision. It got us thinking about the musicians here at school. Okay. Maya seemed intrigued, despite her caution. Alex jumped in. Sara's written some really good songs, and when we started talking about them we realized we keep imagining them arranged for a full band. Specifically with your bass playing and David's vocals. Maya's expression shifted from weariness to genuine interest. You want to start a band? We want to start the right band, Sara clarified. Not just 4 people playing together, but a group with a shared vision for creating something unique and meaningful. Like Queen did, Alex added. They didn't just play music, they created experiences, told stories, pushed boundaries. Maya was quiet for a moment, and Sara held her breath. Then Maya smiled. You know, I've been writing bass lines in my head for months, but I never have anywhere to use them. They're too complex for what I'm doing in my individual practice, but they'd be perfect for band arrangements. Sara felt another surge of the excitement she imagined Freddie must have experienced as his vision for Queen began to take shape. That's exactly what we're talking about. All of us have ideas and abilities that are bigger than what we can express individually. So the next step is talking to David? Maya asked. Together, Alex confirmed, all 3 of us approaching him with a unified vision. As they walked toward David's usual lunch spot, Sara reflected on how different this felt from her original plan to nervously approach each person individually. By building the idea collaboratively, they'd created something that felt inevitable rather than desperate. She suspected this was part of what had made Freddie's approach to forming Queen so successful. David was in the courtyard, playing acoustic guitar and singing quietly to himself. His voice had this quality that reminded Sara of classic rock vocals, but with a modern sensitivity that made it uniquely his own. As they approached, Sara could hear that he was working on an original song, and it was impressive. David, Maya called out softly, not wanting to interrupt his creative process abruptly. He looked up, slightly startled to see all 3 of them together. Hey. What's up? Sara had learned something important from her conversations with Alex and Maya. The key was to start with appreciation for what the person was already creating, then show how that could fit into something larger. That song you're working on is beautiful, Sara said sincerely. Your voice has this quality that would be perfect for the kind of music we've been talking about creating together. David looked confused but pleased. What kind of music are you talking about? Alex, Maya and Sara exchanged glances. They'd reached the moment that would determine whether their band would become reality or remain just an idea. We've been researching how Queen formed, Alex began, and we realized that the best bands aren't just groups of musicians playing together. They're groups of artists who share a vision for what music can be. We think the 4 of us could create something special, Maya added. Original songs, complex arrangements, music that means something. Sara pulled out her notebook. I've written several songs that I think could work really well with your voice, Alex's drumming, and Maya's bass playing. But they're not just my songs anymore, they'd become our songs, with everyone contributing their ideas and abilities. David set down his guitar. "You want me to join your band?" "We want to form a band together," Sara corrected. "All four of us as equal partners, creating something none of us could create alone." David was quiet for a long moment, and Sara found herself thinking about Freddie Mercury again. How had he felt during these crucial conversations? Had he been as nervous as she was? Had he wondered if his vision was too ambitious? Too risky? "Can I hear one of your songs?" David asked finally. Sara's heart jumped. This was the moment she'd been most afraid of, but also the moment she'd been most excited about. She pulled out her guitar and played the opening chords to a song she'd written called Beyond the Horizon. It was about chasing dreams that seemed impossible, about finding the courage to reach for something bigger than yourself. As she sang, she watched David's expression change from polite interest to genuine engagement. When she finished, he was nodding thoughtfully. "That's really good," he said. "I can hear how it would sound with a full band arrangement. The chorus would be incredible with harmony vocals and a strong rhythm section." Alex grinned. "So you're interested?" "I'm more than interested," David replied. "I've been wanting to be part of something like this for a long time. I just didn't know how to make it happen." Sara felt a wave of relief and excitement that was almost overwhelming. They'd done it. They'd taken the first step toward creating something that could be amazing. But she also knew, from everything she'd learned about Queen's formation, that this was just the beginning of the real work. "So what's next?" Maya asked, echoing the question Sara was thinking. "Now we do what Queen did after they decided to work together," Sara said. "We start rehearsing, arranging songs and figuring out what our sound is going to be. But first, we need to decide what we're going to call ourselves." David laughed. "I guess Queen is already taken. Freddie actually chose that name because he thought it sounded grand and theatrical," Alex said. "He wanted a name that would make people expect something special. So we need a name that represents what we want to create," Maya mused. Sara had been thinking about this too. What if we called ourselves Catalyst? Because that's what we're hoping to be for each other. Each of us is the catalyst that helps the others become more than they could be alone. "I like that," David said immediately. "It's ambitious but not pretentious. It suggests change and growth." "Catalyst it is," Alex agreed. As they sat in the courtyard, planning their first rehearsal and talking about their musical influences and goals, Sara realized that she'd learned something profound from Freddie Mercury's story. The courage to start something doesn't come from the absence of fear. It comes from believing in your vision strongly enough to act despite the fear. Over the next few weeks, Catalyst began meeting regularly in the school's music room after classes. Sara's songs, which had once existed only in her bedroom, began transforming into full band arrangements that were more powerful and complex than anything she'd imagined. Alex's drumming provided the foundation that allowed Maya's bass lines to become intricate and melodic, while David's vocals brought emotional depth that elevated every lyric. But they also discovered something that Sara suspected Queen had learned in their early days. Forming a band is about more than just musical compatibility. It's about learning to collaborate, to compromise, to support each other's ideas, while also being honest about what works and what doesn't. There were moments of frustration, times when their different musical backgrounds led to creative disagreements. Sara wanted to incorporate more acoustic elements, while Alex preferred a harder rock sound. Maya's bass lines were sometimes too complex for David's vocal melodies, and David's lyrics occasionally didn't fit with Sara's original song structures. But each challenge they worked through made them stronger as a band. They learned to listen to each other, to build on each other's ideas rather than just defending their own. Sara began to understand why Queen had become legendary, not just for their individual talents, but for their ability to blend those talents into something unified and powerful. 3 months after their formation, Catalyst played their first public performance at the school's talent show. Sara stood at the microphone, looking out at an audience of their classmates and teachers, and felt a moment of pure terror. But then she looked back at Alex, Maya and David, saw their confident smiles and ready instruments, and remembered something crucial about Queen's success. Freddie Mercury had been terrified before Queen's first major performances too, but he'd learned that fear could be transformed into energy, that nervousness could become excitement, and that the support of talented bandmates could make any challenge feel conquerable. As they launched into their opening song, Sara felt that transformation happening. Her nervousness became electric energy that made her voice stronger and her guitar playing more precise. Alex's drums provided a steady foundation that kept everyone grounded, while Maya's bass lines added depth and complexity that made the whole sound fuller. David's voice soared over the arrangement, turning Sara's lyrics into something that felt universal and powerful. The audience response was everything they'd hoped for and more. Students who had never paid attention to Sara, Alex, Maya, or David individually were on their feet, singing along to choruses they'd never heard before. Teachers were nodding appreciatively, and Sara could see some of them filming the performance on their phones. After they finished their set, Sara felt the same sense of accomplishment and possibility that she imagined Freddie Mercury must have experienced after Queen's first successful performance. They'd proven that their vision was more than just a dream. They'd created something real, something that moved people, something that justified all the fear and uncertainty they'd overcome to get to this moment. But perhaps the most important thing Sara learned from following Freddie Mercury's example was that the courage to start something amazing doesn't require the absence of fear. It requires the willingness to act in spite of fear, to reach out to others despite the risk of rejection, and to believe in a vision strongly enough to convince others to believe in it too. As Catalyst packed up their equipment after the show, surrounded by classmates congratulating them and asking about future performances, Sara realized that her initial hesitation about approaching her bandmates had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. She'd thought she needed to have everything figured out before she could ask others to join her vision. But what Freddie Mercury had understood, and what she'd learned through experience, was that the best collaborations begin not with certainty, but with shared excitement about possibility. 6 months later, Catalyst had played at several local venues, recorded a demo of their songs, and built a following that extended beyond their school. Sara's songs had evolved through collaboration into something more sophisticated and emotionally resonant than anything she could have created alone. Alex had developed his drumming in new directions, influenced by Maya's complex bass work and David's melodic sensibilities. Maya had discovered that her bass playing could be both technically impressive and emotionally expressive, while David had learned to use his voice as an instrument that could convey subtlety as well as power. Looking back on that nervous afternoon when she'd first approached Alex in the music room, Sara marveled at how much had changed. But she also understood that the most important change hadn't been external. It had been internal. She'd learned that talent and vision are not enough to create something meaningful. You also need the courage to reach out to others, to risk rejection, to build something together that none of you could build alone. And maybe that's the most important lesson from Freddie Mercury's story. Queen became legendary, not just because of Freddie's talent or vision, but because he had the courage to approach Brian May and Roger Taylor, to convince them to take a chance on something bigger than what they'd been creating individually. He understood that the greatest art comes from collaboration, from the willingness to share your dreams with others, and invite them to help make those dreams reality. Sara kept a photo from Catalyst's first performance on her desk, and sometimes when she looked at it, she thought about that scared 16-year-old girl who had been too afraid to approach her potential bandmates. That girl had learned something that would serve her for the rest of her life, that the distance between dreams and reality is often nothing more than the courage to ask others to join you in building something amazing together. A year later, as Catalyst prepared for their first professional recording session, Sara received an unexpected message that would connect her story to Freddie's legacy in a way she never could have imagined. A music producer who had seen their performance online reached out, mentioning that their collaborative spirit reminded him of Queen's early days. "There's something special about bands that form organically through shared vision rather than convenience," he wrote. "It shows in the music." But here's what Sara discovered was the most profound part of her journey. The skills she'd learned from studying Freddie's approach to forming Queen had applications far beyond music. When she started college and was faced with group projects, she found herself naturally taking on the role of the person who helped others see what was possible when they worked together. When younger students at her high school approached her for advice about starting their own bands, she shared Freddie's wisdom about approaching collaboration with appreciation and vision, rather than desperation. The ripple effect continued when Maya's younger sister, inspired by watching Catalyst's journey, started a poetry club that brought together students from different social groups. Alex began mentoring other drummers, teaching them not just technique but the importance of listening and supporting other musicians. David discovered he had a gift for helping shy singers find their confidence, using the same patience and encouragement that Sara had shown him. And she realized that Freddie Mercury had given her more than just a blueprint for forming a band. He'd given her a template for how to turn fear into action, how to transform individual dreams into shared reality, and how to build something lasting through the simple but profound act of inviting others to join your vision. Sometimes the greatest gifts come not from overcoming our fears, but from learning that our fears often point us toward exactly what we need to do next.